welcome to Good Game, the show for gamers, by gamers. I'm Barjo.
And I'm Junglist.
3 big games this week, Junglist. In inFAMOUS, you're an accidental hero who's not afraid of heights.
Heights are the Hook of Damnation, a steampunk-inspired shooter that also features Terminators, sort of.
Speaking of Terminators, they're back. In Terminator Salvation, it's big action on the big screen, but doesn't make it as a game.
Plus, Pinball, the ancestor to arcade games. Ray goes along to meet some gamers still in a flipper frenzy.
But first, can you guess the game for this week?
Go for it!
News time, Chunky.
Yep.
Off you go. To the news. To read it.
Good game!
Warner Brothers Interactive Entertainment have reportedly offered more than $42 million to purchase a majority share of troubled games developer Midway.
Not tonight, honey. I have a headache.
Midway, who are best known for the Mortal Kombat series, fell onto hard times earlier this year when they declared Chapter 11 bankruptcy and were forced to offer up their assets for sale to cover their debts. The acquisition would see Warner Brothers take control of the Mortal Kombat franchise as well as a number of Midway's development houses. Trouble has struck the North American launch of the licensed film tie-in for the latest Terminator film, with the entire stock of the PC version of Terminator Salvation being recalled due to a manufacturing fault. Every single retail copy of the PC version of the game are reported to have reached store shelves with a fatal flaw that prevented them from installing, a problem that the game's publisher Evolved Games are calling a replication error. The console versions of the game remain unaffected, and no such problems are anticipated for the game's Australian launch.
Good game!
inFAMOUS is an open-world superhero game for the PS3 that literally explodes onto your screen the moment you hit start.
You play as Cole, delivery boy turned accidental hero. After a mysterious explosion shakes the town's lights out, you find yourself at the center of it all, and indeed the carrier of the bomb itself.
Oh, God.
It's not an ordinary bomb though, Jung. It's one of those fancy bombs that turns you into a superhero, electricity-wielding action man that likes to climb, zap, and land with a bang. The town has been taken over by 3 groups, and they all want to see you dead, as well as each other.
The Reapers. Before the blast, they were just a bunch of junkies dealing drugs. Now, they own the Neon District.
Lucky for you, you're awesome and can deal with most opponents with a fatal head shock. If you're too awesome, the game's difficulty will go up a notch, and we were kinda chuffed when this happened, but you don't always have to play on hard if you don't want to. Climbing in the game is a joy, and there's lots of reasons why. You press X to jump, and the game will guide you very subtly towards the next platform.
But this guiding isn't intrusive, and you barely even notice that the game is helping you. You can also grab almost anything. In fact, even a bare wall is grabbable, and you use it as a double jump to get to the next high point. And the camera tracking is just excellent. You're also guided when meleeing, but not to the point that it feels like an old X-Men game. To walk off a ledge or off a building, you actually need to push X to jump off or circle to hang down. And this confirmation step really adds a lot of control to your character, and it makes me think that the developers, Sucker Punch, really thought hard about how to give you that control. They must be hardcore gamers.
You don't have a driver's license, but who needs it when you can ride along on train tracks and power lines, or just stand on the hood of a car? Every time you power up a new section of the city, it gives you a new ability. These are always awesome and often time savers as well. For example, just before you reach the second island, you learn how to glide, which is very useful seeing as high ground is your friend.
You don't get an AK or an M4, but you'll mainly be happy zapping, using shock grenades, shock waves, a weird Ghostbusters one, and the beautiful, spectacular joy that is the lightning storm.
About half a dozen times in the game, you'll be given infinite juice, which is a chance for Cole to really let loose and show him who's boss. It's an excellent reward for the gamer, and we noticed that inFAMOUS was really good at rewarding you in general.
Missions are sent to you via GPS and your headset, but sometimes civilians will just walk up to you and ask you to help with a brewing situation.
Hey, need some help over here! Someone else that needs saving, Cole!
As you can see, the town is in a state of despair and disrepair, and often you feel like you're walking into something that's already happening, and this makes everything feel really alive.
There was only really one mission we didn't like, and the underground missions are a bit samey, but they're really just tutorial missions to teach you a new power.
Checkpoints are so forgiving, it made me feel happy inside, Jung. Heaps of quests and side missions have a moral choice associated with them. Do you let some cops die to have a weakened enemy, or do you save them but have a tougher fight? Do you put up the evil poster or the good poster around town?
The path that you choose will give you different abilities, change how people react to you, and change your appearance and electric color. If you're too bad, people will start throwing rocks at you. But since you're bad anyway, it won't hurt you anymore to start hurling cars at them for their impudence. Some of these moral choice moments have awesome consequences, and we don't want to spoil it for you, but there's some clever ones in there. If you're good, it's blue electricity for you. If you're bad, it's red. Which one did you go, Badge? Rude. Did you feel guilty for it?
You know, I did a bit. Hearing your friends tear strips off you for your actions really drives the choices that you made home.
You brought this on yourself. You can sleep downstairs if you want.
I really liked the hanging cover, John.
Yeah, you can't snap into cover, but you can hide behind a wall if you press circle near it. The best way to take out a standard goon is just to hang from a ledge and then zoom right in for a slow-mo precision shot. It's a great take on a cover system, very flexible, but you'll need more than that when you come up against the game's bosses.
Why don't you just die?
There's a lot of things that make this game great. A lot of small things, like the crow sound effects as you drain someone's life. The distance you'll slide down a pole when you land on it, depending on how much inertia you have, and maybe going on a bit, Jung, but it's all these little things that add to the fluidity of the world, and you really notice it when you see a character just climbing about the place.
Yeah, all these little things combined just make you feel like you're working with the world rather than fighting against it. The enemies and style of the game can look a bit repetitive at the start, but stick with it because it just gets better and better. There's a real inspiration to the mechanics and the style of the game, and as an open world, it truly feels open because you can just pick a direction and climb. I'm giving it 9 out of 10 rubber chickens.
I'd just like to say that flipping cars with the shockwave is some of the most fun I've had in a game in a long time. And the whole misunderstood feel to the character. Cole is a superhero you will love no matter which path you choose. I'm giving it 9 out of 10 rubber chickens.
Gather around, good gamers, and let me tell you a story of adventure in the high seas, men with low moral fiber, buried treasure, and one of the greatest games ever made, The Secret of Monkey Island. As the game's protagonist, Guybrush Threepwood, you had to embark on a Caribbean adventure to become a real pirate, defeat the villainous ghost pirate LeChuck, and win the heart of the beautiful governor, Elaine Marley. One of the game's greatest moments was this. It's called insult sword fighting, a deadly form of combat that involves fighting off the game's drunken pirate population not just with your sword, but also with your wit. By attacking or counter-attacking your scurvy-afflicted opponent with a stinging insult, you will not only defeat them, but you'd also earn yourself the title of Master Swordsman and find yourself one step closer to being a real pirate. So remember, gamers, if someone ever says that you fight like a dairy farmer, the correct response is to say they fight like a cow. Yar, skooty yar, you're the wiggy scar, skooty yar, you're skooty.
Good game.
Okay, faceburgers. Can you name this console? If you said the Nintendo Virtual Boy, give yourself a pat on the back. The Virtual Boy was the brainchild of visionary game and toy inventor Gunpei Yokoi, who had masterminded some of Nintendo's best and most successful products, including the Game & Watch and the Game Boy. Unfortunately, the Virtual Boy wasn't Mr. Yokoi's best work. It looked like a big red pair of goggles sitting on top of an L-shaped tripod, and its controller looked a bit more like an N64 one, except without the analog stick, and it had an extra D-pad. To play the thing, you had to smush your face into the console, being careful not to let any light in the process. And what was in the eye holes, you might ask? Well, this of course. There were 2 screens, one for each eye, and using some high-tech optical trickery called parallax, it simulated the kind of 3-dimensional effects that you could usually only get at the movies with a pair of blue and red sunglasses. It actually sort of worked, and it did look like objects were moving at you from the background to the foreground. This effect was particularly evident in Mario's Tennis, a game where Kongs, Koopa Troopas, and Toads would serve it up to you from across the other side of the court. The only problem with all of this is that the Virtual Boy could only display one color, red. The searing crimson visuals were not only an eyesore, but they could also cause some unfortunate side effects for some players. If you did manage to endure the migraine-causing, vomit-inducing graphics, the Virtual Boy did have a handful of games, some of which were actually worth playing. Probably the best of these was Wario Land, a side-scrolling platformer featuring Mario's arch-nemesis in a starring role. The game was a straightforward platform game in the tradition of any of the other Wario games that had been out on the Game Boy, and it never really fully utilized the Virtual Boy's 3D capabilities. But it didn't matter much because it was actually one of the few Virtual Boy games to offer any proper, lasting fun. The rest of the console's library was made up of mostly really mediocre games like this. Tellero Boxer was the Virtual Boy's first and only punching simulator. And if you remember Nintendo's classic boxing series Punch-Out, then you'll already know how it played because Tellero Boxer was essentially the same game, only with robots, and not as fun. The main problem was that it was stupid hard, so stupid hard that it was stupid. The difficulty was so rigged in the CPU opponent's favor that you couldn't help but shout obscenities at it, regardless of where you were or who else was around.
Oh, hacks!
The rest of the Virtual Boy's back catalog is barely worth mentioning. Galactic Pinball was a fairly authentic, but totally dull reproduction of the classic ball game that barely even bothered using the Virtual Boy's 3D features. Mario Clash attempted to resurrect the old-style Mario Bros. Arcade game with a bit of added dimension thanks to another plane of action at the back of the screen, but it wasn't very good. And V-Tetris was just plain old Tetris. Nothing wrong with that, but it mostly avoided using any of the Virtual Boy's unique features. One game that did tackle the 3D capabilities head-on, though, was this.
Here we go!
The appropriately named Red Alarm was one of the most graphically advanced Virtual Boy titles since it featured some proper 3D graphics instead of that pseudo 3D parallax stuff. The game looked and played a lot like Nintendo's own Star Fox series, with you taking control of a bright red wireframe spaceship, tasked with shooting down an armada of other bright red wireframey things, making Red Alarm one of the Virtual Boy's most technologically advanced and fun game titles. And that's about all there is to say about the Virtual Boy. Only 20 or so games were ever released for the console, and after appalling sales in both Japan and North America, Nintendo decided to take the Virtual Boy off of life support in 1996, just 1 year after its launch. In fact, this little red headache was so unpopular in the rest of the world that Ninty didn't even bother releasing it in Australia, which may have been a blessing in disguise.
Lacking the pep to go the distance? Waggle-Max nitrotic boosting fuels are the answer. Whether you're racing to the finish line or late for church, Waggle-Max nitrotic boosting fuels get you there in a jiffy. We've developed the perfect formula to integrate with theoretically, literally any vehicle. Here's what 9-time F-Zero champion Chip Speedily has to say about our product.
I couldn't have done it without Waggle-Max nitrotic boosting fuels. Now please let my family go.
Available in premium, unleaded, unicorn blood, undeaded, and cherry. Waggle-Max nitrotic boosting fuels. Forget the ozone and enter the go zone.
Good game.
Damnation is an alternate history game of sorts where you play as Rourke, a resistance fighter on a path of revenge against the Terminators.
Terminators later in the show, bitch.
Well, they sure look like Terminators to me, Jung. Actually, they're called Automan, which is very original. Automatic Man.
The game adopts a steampunk aesthetic. Electricity is replaced with steam, and technology takes a different developmental path in the universe. And aside from some fairly unrealistic motorbike rides, you won't be able to enjoy the technological culture because you're going to be spending all of your time climbing, and climbing, and climbing.
Yes, the hook here is that buzzword from last year's E3, verticality. But Jung, every time I saw that sweeping shot showing me where I needed to go, I couldn't help but feel like I was being punished.
Oh, get stuffed.
And after all that effort to get to the end of the level, it's pretty disheartening that your teammates are just standing there like it was no big thing.
The acrobatics are the strength of the game, and to move to another area, you need to hold right bumper and then press jump to move across. I like this extra confirmation badge. It stops you from making errors.
Yeah, I liked it too, Jung, but after the control and fluidity of inFAMOUS, I found myself getting frustrated by this pretty fast. The level design also often leaves you guessing, so you just kind of meander until you get to the end, and it's kind of like looking down at a maze but not being able to see the exit. And what's the point of these stairs? Who would design these stairs if not just to frustrate people?
There's a few different enemy types, but in general, the gunplay is terabad. It's quite hard even on the easy setting, and there aren't very many guns to choose from. The AI is also rubbish. It won't take cover, it'll just stand out in the open, and sometimes it doesn't even notice when it's being shot.
Sometimes they also dance. You're right, Jung, they're way too powerful, and you'd think something like that would get picked up in testing. If you have an easy setting, make it easy.
It also screams for a cover system. You not being able to snap into cover means you have to go up to a wall and crouch, then press crouch again to be able to shoot over it. You can't shoot while crouching because the gun isn't high enough and you'll shoot straight into the wall.
You can play this whole game in co-op, which is great, and there's some great flanking you can do there, but an exploration game all about verticality with split screen doesn't really work. You just can't see enough.
It's like they went to all the effort to make the huge levels that look great, but they didn't bother making the combat fun. After an hour or so, you find yourself putting up with the combat just to keep on exploring. It's a shame there's so many problems, Badge, because some of the levels are pretty cool.
It may be from this game coming from an Unreal Tournament mod, I don't know, but it just felt like it needed more love. Jung, I quite like this kind of sci-fi, but it's just not done justice here. At least there's lots of windows to jump through though. I'm giving it 5.5 out of 10 rubber chickens.
The overpowered enemies mean that using a melee attack or a shotgun is pointless, and any game that makes those two things pointless has its priorities wrong. I'm giving it 5.5 as well.
Good game.
Have you heard of the Dark Ages, Badge?
I have, Jung. 'Twas the time before video games even existed.
Yep, and then in the 1930s there was light and balls and flippers and poppers and
Pinball, it's the ancestor of arcade games, and thanks to some serious collectors, they're still racking up the points today.
Ray went to the 2009 Pinball Expo to find out more.
How much money do you spend on a week playing in these places?
$7. $3.
How old are you?
10. But my mum's waiting outside, so it's alright. $5. That was to go to the pictures too.
Growing up, I never really got into pinball because my parents were convinced that arcades were for gangsters and juvenile delinquents. But pinball machines paved the way for video gaming in arcades. So what is it about the bells and whistles of the humble pinball?
I can remember playing a game when I was about 6 in my local milk bar just before I went to school, and I spent all of my lunch money on the pinball machine, so I had nothing to eat when I went to school.
Went overseas on holidays in Italy and sitting there, couldn't speak the language, but there was a pinball machine, I could do that all day.
Pinball machine in the fish and chip shop, playing with my dad.
Picture this. Christchurch, New Zealand, 1980. Hamburger joint, and the first Space Invaders came in and invaded my hamburger joint. What did I do? Was it Space Invaders? Was it pinball? I stuck with pinball, actually. I looked at the Space Invaders from behind, but I stuck with pinball.
I was a die-hard pinball player of the 70s, and when video machines came out, I was one that did play video. And Space Invaders was a favourite, so was Galaga, Pac-Man, Defender, just to name a few. But I think when you play a pinball machine, you can actually see the flipper, you can actually see the bumper, and you're in full control of the ball. So it's up to you to keep that ball in play. It's up to you to go for the skill shots.
What tips do you have for someone who's completely new to pinball?
The best bet is to study the game, know how the features work, just like a video game, actually. You have to study how the game works, the features, and what targets you've got to hit, and what ramps you've got to go up, and how many times, and to do what to get an extra ball, and how to get a replay.
Pinball machines have been around forever. What do you think is the secret to their success?
Well, they say the ball is wild, so every time you play a game, it's a different game. So the challenge is reset again and again.
Trying to beat the machine, trying to get the ball to where you want it to go and, you know, rack up the points.
I like the designs, the noise, the lights, mostly the designs, yeah, the artwork on the backlights.
What do you think is the future of pinball?
That, doing it yourself, your own game.
So Christian, you've made this entire pinball machine yourself from scratch. How did you go about doing it?
Well, you just start somewhere and you keep going. The artwork you see on the playfield was hand-drawn, hand-painted, and we had another friend who did the cabinet artwork for us. The software's all mine, the electronics is mine, the rest of it's mine. Ultimately, I want to have, you know, software and a board that people can do this themselves.
Well, I think there'll always be nostalgia for pinball machines, especially for people like me. Hopefully I'll get my children into it too.
It doesn't necessarily have to be a lonely thing that you do by yourself on a TV. Like, you can have a group of people and you can sort of play it together.
The machines are getting older. Obviously, there aren't the manufacturers around like they used to be. So it's sort of becoming more of a collector's thing now.
Well, I can't see a pinball machine replacing my consoles anytime soon. I can certainly respect the attraction that they hold. Now, if you excuse me. What do you mean, tilt? Oh!
Good game.
Now for some real Terminators, Badge. The recent Terminator movie is what the last one should have been. No more time traveling. This is the period where the machines wake up, the human race hardens up, and the CIA stops pushing too many pencils. Terminator Salvation, the game, is set just before the events of the movie. We reviewed it on PS3.
Terminator is a third-person cover shooter you can play solo or with a friend next to you. The machines have some heavy-duty firepower, so you have to rely a lot on shoot-and-move tactics. There's bits of cover in each new area, a la Gears of War, but the house doesn't actually regenerate until the fight is over, so if you're pinned down and you've got low health and no ammo, you're already dead. You just don't know it yet.
Emphasis is placed on flanking, and there always seems to be one side path you can just go around and pop the enemy in the back. If the enemy tends to follow you, then that's okay, because your squad mates will pop them in the back for you.
Yeah, useful squad mates are a good thing. When you run out of ammo, they'll chuck you some. When you're getting flanked, they'll let you know.
Been so long since I've been topside. Forgot how beautiful it can be.
I miss it. How it used to be.
Terminator also tries to build an emotional bond between the player and the squad mate. And it fails completely. I didn't care whether they lived or died, but at least while they're alive, they do useful things. One thing that baffled me, though, and it's relentless, is everyone in the game can't stop saying John Connor.
This is John Connor. This is John Connor. This is John Connor. My name is John Connor. Well, I'm John Connor.
John Connor.
Right behind you, Connor.
Colhagen.
Connor.
Connor.
Let's get these people some air! And for a linear game, it's quite hard finding the line. And not being able to jump over a 1 meter block of concrete is annoying.
You all right, Connor?
They're not listening to us, Jung. It's strongly worded letter time. Every game needs a jump button. You will spend most of your time behind that concrete, though, as enemies will specifically target you if you're out of cover.
Like any Star Wars game, it benefits heavily from that memorable franchise music. You could show anything to that music and it would look epic. You could show GLaDOS the cat. Hang on, show it with slow-mo. That's one epic cat. I'm actually kind of scared.
Hold me.
What?
Nothing. There's no multiplayer, and once finishing the game, there's no real reason to go back to it. It's quite short, and while some areas are fun, I think it fits snugly into that movie game stigma, John.
I had to wonder, is the bar just set really high nowadays? I mean, after a level of COD 4, you have to kind of take a break because it's so intense. After a level of Terminator, you're like, yeah, this is kind of fun, but I hope it gets better. And a great example of that is the giant boss it shows you right at the start of the game, which you never get to fight.
Are we about ready for final thoughts?
Well, as far as movie games go, it's better than usual. Sliding from cover to cover is kind of cool, but it is very much a movie game. It has its glitches, it feels thrown together, and it lasts just 6 hours. As for the variety of enemies, you can count them on one hand. I'm giving it 5.5 out of 10 rubber chickens.
It's the same old story. Great graphics and music, but average gameplay and length. I'm giving it 6 out of 10 rubber chickens. Do you think it's alright to make Arnie jokes even though he's not even in this game or movie?
Stop whining! So did you guess the game for this week?
It was Crazy Climber, a skyscraper scaling arcade game that was all about verticality. In fact, for 1980, it was about as vertical as you could get.
You had to scramble up the side of a building like a human fly while attempting to avoid obstacles like open windows, angry office workers, and falling objects, all to get to the rooftop. Why are you climbing in the first place? Nobody knows. Oh, no! Next week, we're scaling the heights of video game awesomeness, turning back the clock and going back in time to the decade that started both Badge and I's gaming obsessions.
That's right, we're going all the way back to the 1990s, taking a look at just what was going on in the decade that gave us some of the best games of all time. In Good Game Pings the 90s.
Until then, jump on the Good Game forums. Tell us what you liked and what you didn't like about tonight's show.
Until next time, gamers, Barjo out.
Junglist, in.
It doesn't make sense.
I know, it's crazy.
Breaking the rules.